Call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any questions or anything on there? Not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the agenda.
Second it.
Oh.
That's my spot.
We were waiting.
That's my spot. No one else take that.
Okay, Scott's done.
Okay.
Alright, been moved to second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Next item is a consent agenda. Are there any questions on the last meeting? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Next is public comments. Do we have anybody here? Doesn't appear so. So we'll move to special reports and presentations. Ben.
You know how glad I am to be out of my office. I snuck down here. It's good to see you guys, and it is very good to be back in person. So what I had talked to the Budget Finance Committee about was doing a year-end wrap-up or year-end review. For logistics tonight, my presentation verbatim is in your packet. And if you want to flip through with me, we'll just go through it that way. And then I do want to reference, at the end, I want to reference to two different reports, just kind of go through what they look like. You'll continue to get these on a monthly basis, these separate types of reports. So what I'm going to do tonight is really just go through what the overall funds status are. And when I say that, we're going to touch on surplus or deficit and then what the cash balance is. And then touch on some of the revenues and key revenue highlights. So we'll go through a little bit of that. And then touch on expenses and how we did, budget to actual, and then we'll kind of go through some of the reports very briefly. So if you want to go to that third page of slide 3, it has the first graph, if you will. What this does is show you kind of the overall fund status, the surplus or deficit within each of the operating funds. A positive and negative. A negative isn't necessarily bad. Understand that that's really spending savings account as expected within a budget. It's not like for-profit where cash is king and a profit is what you're here for. You're here to deliver, obviously, services. And what I've done here is just compare 2019 to 2020. 2019's green bar is a fairly sizable negative only because on purpose, you guys paused on the transfers over to the general fund from the enterprise funds. And that's probably the bulk of what that negative is. 2020, you saw still a negative, but it was drastically reduced because that transfer came back for 2020. And I'll touch on some of the revenues because there's some positive news on 2020 in the general fund for the revenues. When you look at the library, it's meant to be almost zero because anything you collect goes right back out to the library. And that's the goal. Cemetery has a reserve fund that we continually add money to as we can, something you guys control. NRP, Neighborhood Revitalization Plan, that's in and out as well. There should be zero surplus there. The next 3 are your enterprise funds, your utilities, electric, water, and wastewater. For 19, there were positives. 20 was a positive in electric and just almost a positive within wastewater. And water had a negative as well. Some of that's as a result of capital expenditures, not necessarily operating. So on the enterprise funds, what we do is take a look at the operating expenses and how those revenues cover it, and anything left over is available for capital expenditures. When we go through the budget process, you guys will see that in detail. It's also in the reports that I'm going to refer to later. The refuse and recycling went from a positive to a negative 2. Here the contractual services were, I'm going to say they were misbudgeted, but the forecast wasn't really accurate, if you will, within 2020, so we're going to fix that in 2021 and 2022. As far as the general fund is concerned, the big revenues that you saw decrease substantially in 2020 are court fines. Obviously, with everybody staying inside, it's hard to ticket anybody, right? But We saw that across the board throughout the metro area the same way. Sales tax came in just under 2% over budget, which is great, especially since most entities within the metro area had far higher negatives than that, if you will. So you guys came out really well on that. On the next page is the cash balances, just for the operating funds that you control on the governmental side. So we're splitting it into governmental and enterprise type, the for-profit kind of vision. On the general fund, we still have a strong cash balance. In this graph, it shows three different bars, 2019 compared to 2020. And then I also inserted the most recent cash balance. It shows that even though there was still a positive, but a lower positive in the general fund in 2020, we see a large collection early in the year for property tax for 2021. So that cash balance bounces right back. The cemetery is just a slight increase in all three of those years as well. Library and the NRP ended up being right what we thought they would be. On the enterprise fund side, the electric fund cash balance is still really strong, and it continues to stay that way. It doesn't change much month to month throughout the year, which is good. Water's not bad compared to how big the fund is. And then wastewater we'll obviously talk about more this summer. We're managing that cash balance. It's pretty narrow, but I know the Budget and Finance Committee is very aware of that, and we talk about it on a regular basis, what some of those plans might look like. And then refuse and recycle cash stays about even at just positive, 10,000 or 12,000. The next is the cash balances for the reserves. And the only reason I put this in here just to show what those reserves look like, and these are funds that are separate. These are the savings account, if you will, of what you guys have to deal with. The general fund went from just under 300,000 in 2019. We ate it down a little bit in 2020, and for 2021 is expected to be even, if not go up a little bit, by the end of this year. The cemetery fund is fairly flat. Electric reserve, we don't expect to change much. If anything, at the end of this year, we may be adding money to it. Water and wastewater, and depending on how the year unfolds, we may end up seeing some positives there as well on both of those funds. The next one is slide 7. It has a ring. What this really does is, okay, now we know what the cash balances look like. We know where the reserves are and how we ended the year. Where did the revenues come from? Where did the resources come from? What this does is just show you a pie of those revenues that come in. And just to orient you here, it doesn't include any transfers because those really aren't true revenues, if you will. You can transfer money from an enterprise fund over to the general fund, and essentially you're counting it twice. So this is all externally focused revenues. I just pulled those out, the transfers out. So this gives you a true picture of what your total citywide revenues look like. So without transfers, we're looking at $13.1 million in revenues citywide. A bulk of those obviously are going to be utility driven. In fact, half of those are just the 3 utilities, half of your revenues, followed by real estate tax or property tax, and then sales tax are your next numbers. So those are the resources. How did they compare to 2019? The next one is a sidebar or a side graph. It kind of shows where the light green is showing 2020 and the dark green is 2019. This actually came out a lot better than what I thought it would, especially beginning this year, only because of what we see in the market with other clients and the revenues dipping fairly low. But you guys stayed strong in 2020 compared to 2019. Your revenues came out really well. I'm not going to tell the federal government that here. Pretty soon we're going to say that it's horrible so we can pull more money down from the stimulus. So we'll be working with Glenn on that. The next one is the utility revenues, how they compared. And on the electric utility side, we saw just a minor decrease in the revenues there, but overall they stayed fairly flat, fairly level on what we expected to see. So that's the revenues. That's where it came from, but where did it go? The next graph that shows the ring on it is the expenses. I tried to put a little bit of information here, and I know we can use some of this for the website and other newsletters and whatever. We tried to put some definitions behind some of these categories to show what it is. Obviously, being a service-driven organization, anything from personnel and contractual services are going to be your top two. And they're usually about even, and they are here. And again, this is citywide. This includes all funds. So your personnel and your contractual are your biggest, followed by capital outlay, which is typical. Capital outlay and then debt service at 18.6. Now you may say 13.1 in revenue and 18.6 in expenses. How does that happen? Well, think about that. You've got a capital expenditures that are going out the door. Part of that capital, if you pull that out, you pull the capital out, that's spending of either savings that had come in from bond issues before that hadn't been spent yet. That's what I'm talking about. You can actually spend more than what you're bringing in. Because in this case, it's not just operating. That's why I usually, on the budget process, usually separate the operating from the capital. And that way you show what you've been funding as operations and what you've been funding as capital. And we'll go through that this summer as well. Kind of shows you how you balance everything out. And you guys are doing a great job doing that too. You got some big projects that have gone on. And you're getting those completed. So this is not these are not bad numbers that are sitting there. So just like on the revenue side, how did we compare on the expense side? You can kind of see the same thing. Light green in this case is 2019, 2020 is the dark green. General fund, the revenues went up a little bit. Most of those are in the personnel category. And really parks, seasonal went up about 30,000. And police department personnel as well went up a little bit. I don't think that's pay. I think it's just the fact that turnover may have been lower in 2020 because nobody was moving. All the other numbers are what we expected to see. The comparisons aren't really far off. So those are really strong as well.
So you've been to these expenses include on the utilities, the cost of goods.
Yeah,
so
it
any
does.
increases there would be reflected.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's a good point. Appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, the cost of goods is included in here too. So any purchase power is included in there. Any sewer treatment or water purchases in there as well. But transfers are pulled out again in this case. So that's how we compared to 19. We always look at a budget and how did we meet our expectations. Overall, we met our expectations for 2020. Almost on the dot except for electric. Electric came in quite a bit lower than expectations. And I say that electric, usually we pad that budget quite a bit only because you never know what's going to happen if something breaks in electric. You never know when you're going to have a $800,000 bill you got to pay in 1 week. And this is the reason you have reserves in these enterprise funds, is this very thing, this very reason that you have those bills or those unexpected expenses that come through. Could be capital expenses. And their equipment is not small.
And then what's the variable there in bonded interest? I mean, how do we not know what the budget is? How do we miss that? What's variable in that?
Yeah, here I'm not real sure why that one was missed.
Okay.
I know we started the 2021 and we looked at that pretty close.
Right. It's not a big delta.
Yeah, it's
you
not.
think
It's
it'd be
not a
pretty
big
close
delta.
to knowing what our debt
Yeah.
payments are going to be.
Yeah, and we've been reviewing in debt on a probably a monthly basis at this point, doing some planning for the future. So we're getting pretty accurate on that. And one of the ways to fix that, and we'll continually look at it, is amendments that come through that we need. And those often are done on a quarterly basis. I don't think you guys have done any this year at all, or 2020 at all. But as those come up, we'll bring them back to the Budget Finance Committee and bring them back to you guys. And that's one of the ways the state allows you to correct that information. That's a good question. The next few pages show just some key revenues, and I call this a dashboard. I produce this for Glenn and put it in the packets every month. What it does is on the left-hand column, it shows you the last few years, how a trend on an annual basis has taken place. And then on the right, it shows you the current year, in this case it's 2020, and how month to month compares to 2020 compares to 2019. On the property tax, it's a little difficult to see because there's not a whole lot of changes. One line is smack dab on top of the second one. When you look at sales tax, you can kind of see what those fluctuations are. On the sales tax, there was a fairly significant dip in November and then back up in December. And that's a timing issue. The sales tax in November was actually booked in December, so you'll see it double. But for the most part, it was about 2% over what it was in 2019. So we ended up positive there. I showed the same type of information for county sales tax, the building permit revenue, which usually tells us what property tax is going to look like in a year or 2 years, and then even what sales tax might continue to look like as you bring more permits in, more housing in, because that'll drive demand. Utility charges. These are always interesting because they're weather driven. You can kind of see where the peaks and valleys are. I don't have this done for February, but when you do get that, you'll see that peak that we had in January and February where it got really cold. So you'll see those charges go up. Water utility, and we do the same thing for wastewater and refuse. And that's what I've got for the overall graphs. Before I jump into the actual statements that we start to show you guys, any of you questions?
I reviewed these earlier, and they're probably the most thorough that I've ever seen come out of anything in the most easily deciphered document for financials.
Good.
For the municipality, I think I've ever seen. So, just
Well,
thank you for putting in all that work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if you have any other, if you need to see other information or you'd like to see something, by all means, you guys know my email, just shoot it to me and we can produce it. So we've got access to your finance system, and it's fairly easy to manipulate a lot of the data into a report that might mean something either for you or your constituents, your taxpayers. So I appreciate you saying that. The reports you have that you'll have on a monthly basis, they actually start on page 51 of 64. That's actually the report for February 2021. And what we're doing here is comparing 2020 actual with the 2020 budget and then where we are year to date. And the column that you're going to want to pay attention to is that last column. And because we calculate where things should be just on a regular basis and then where they are. So if there's any kind of fluctuations, like 17% of the year's passed, right? 41% of the property taxes already come in. There's two big deposits on property tax. So that's going to be more than what we typically, it's 41% is obviously going to be more than that 17. But on the expense side, it really usually follows that 17% fairly close. And if there's an anomaly there, obviously we can note that and see, one of those expenses may go up. Electric's probably a best example. When you have that invoice come in, it's going to be more than what your 17% looks like. So that'll be explainable. So the next thing I want to do is start adding a column. I'll add a column to the right to kind of give you an explanation of what some of those differences might be. I didn't do this page for every fund because some of them just don't change hardly at all. But I did do it for all the operating funds that are more important. That's all the enterprise funds along with the general fund. And year to date, I haven't seen any surprises through the end of February on what that looks like. So that's the comparison. That's what you're going to get moving forward. On 58 of 64 is a little different because the years ended. So what we're showing here is 2019 compared to 2020 actuals, and then I put 2021's budget in there. That way we can kind of see what it looks like moving forward. And that is the bulk of what I have. The next thing that I think I do want to put on here is probably cash balances, and we'll work with that on a quarterly basis because they change. So I might include those on a quarterly basis to kind of show you what they look like. So that's what I've got.
Suggestion, how possible would it be on these line items, these revenue line items that are not, even distributions like property tax? I mean, they should hit about the same time every year, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right. Yeah.
would there be any way to compare percentage-wise revenues on property tax where we were last year at end of February compared
Yeah.
to, so
Yeah.
where we at 41%
The
last
period to date, basically.
Yeah, so just a
That's a good
comparison of percent budget used at
Yeah.
this point last year, knowing it's not a linear.
Yep.
And then we can say, oh, it's,
Yeah.
why the
Well, there's
delta?
normal. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's easy to add. It's not
I
hard to
think
add.
that helped understand.
That's a good point. I didn't want to throw too many numbers on here based on what you want to use, but that's useful to me. That's useful. I've got it back on my PC to do the same thing.
Looks good, appreciate it.
Good.
Any other questions for Mr. Ben? All right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks,
Ben.
Next item on the agenda is city clerk. As you all know, Laura has retired, so we are required to have a city clerk. Our plan is to have an interview committee for city clerk, but in the meantime, I'd like to appoint Amber to be the interim city clerk until those interviews can take place.
Has the job been posted at all?
It will be.
Okay.
Any rough idea of what your timeline is?
Typically, we hold job postings open for about 10 days, so hopefully, I'm hoping by next council meeting, hopefully. I don't know if we can squeeze it in that quick, but depending on how many applications we get and all that fun stuff. We're going to post it, I believe, tomorrow.
Yeah, we can get it out.
So it'll be open for 10 days, then we'll have interviews. Then that interview committee will make a formal recommendation to me, and I'll bring, if I agree with their recommendation, we'll bring it to the council.
What would that committee consist of, or who would be on that committee?
So I'm gonna have Rob Coley, Chief Patrick, and Glenn on that committee to do the interviews. All right. I'll entertain a motion to appoint Amber as interim city clerk.
I move we appoint Amber Packard as interim city clerk.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item is the equipment lease purchase bids. Explain that one?
Yeah. So what this is
Did you just throw everything on one meeting so you didn't have to?
I might as well.
I thought you said you liked them.
That's one trip.
Smart about
Very
it.
transparent.
Yes, exactly. One trip is when my wife says I go to Home Depot, it's my 3-trip minimum. You got to go 3 times before. And she's usually right too. But I do 1 trip, great. So what this is a lease purchase. We issued an RFP for various pieces of equipment that we approved, that you guys approved through the budget process for 2021. And the RFP went out to a number of banks. We've got 5 different responses back. And you can see in your packet, there's on that second page of the item, who those 5 banks were. Commerce Bank, Kansas State Bank, first option, and then a couple more, which the local banks are the ones we typically try to push into obtaining those bids pretty hard. We opened it up, closed it, and then opened it right back up because one of them had submitted it, but it didn't hit our servers, so we give them another chance to submit it. So the rates fairly consistent across the board, not unlike what we've seen before on leases that are going out right now. And in this case, Commerce Bank was the low, with the exception of what's called optional redemption. If you tried to prepay anything, your interest rate would go up. Didn't like that option. So the next one down was Kansas State Bank, which was 1.5%, which is still really low. They were our choice because they were the next one up, but you can also prepay at any time. And it just so happens that they were local. So that's who we would recommend for approval on the lease purchase for this year.
Yeah, and I agree with Ben. I mean, I know Kansas State was just a tick up, but if we can, you know, keep it local and they don't have the option of the interest rate going up, I prefer to give the bid to them. Would be my preference.
So is this a specific size of a, or is it more of a line of credit up to a certain amount? Or do we have
Now,
a
this is
number?
based on equipment. Anything
Okay.
bought in 2021, if there was
Right. So remind me what that number is.
Yeah, so there was a police car, I want to say there was around 135 to 150,000, I may be wrong. I know it was over 100,000. In this case, there was a police car, there was a AEMS, the paramedics, I think F-150 or F-250. And then there was a couple other items. Those are the two big ticket items though, that went into there. I want to say it was 150,000. That should be the number.
All those were in the budget.
That's right.
Did you look at where the bids for those items came in compared to what we budgeted?
I don't purchase those. That's up to the department. So now that we've got the lease in place, we estimated what we'd need for the lease, and then they'll go look at the bids for the equipment.
Okay.
Now that we've got the funding in place, they'll go ahead and order their equipment and see what that looks like. I would assume that would come back to you guys for approval once it's ready to
And
go.
the reason we do this way rather than lay out the cash is because the money's so cheap and you can spread it out over
Yeah.
whatever the term of
Right.
the lease is. So we're conserving our cash, and at 1.5%, it's a pretty good deal. So
That's
therefore
right.
you can get what you need here rather than waiting another couple of years to purchase. Some of this really needs to be, I know on the police side, needs to be purchased pronto.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right. So you'll see those come back individually.
Any other questions for Ben? Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
I move we accept the bid from Kansas State Bank.
Second.
Been moved in second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the bucket truck bid.
So we have a 2005 bucket truck. It's in really good shape, but it's getting up in years and it's going to start costing us money. And we had in the budget for this year to replace that truck. And I put in the budget for $300,000. The bid came in way underneath that for $216,000 and some change. So I submitted it to you all for consideration. The old bucket truck we will be putting on Purple Wave, and the prices of buckets right now on Purple Wave are going really high.
What do you estimate that we get out of that?
I'm going to estimate over $50,000. We put the digger truck on a couple years ago. We got $43,000 out of that truck. The company that truck was purchased from went out of business. You couldn't buy parts for them. Everybody is pretty much selling out to Alltech, which is the company that we went to that bid this item. And we got $43,000 out of that truck. And it was a pretty old unit and it needed a lot of help. So used equipment is going really high. I did a lot of research on Purple Wave, and bucket trucks are going for between $30,000 to $100,000 for used bucket trucks, which is, but the interest rates were down. The truck, actually nobody's been buying trucks here last couple of years due to a lot of things that are going on. And they actually lowered some of the prices, so it worked out.
Any other questions for Chris?
So when you sell these on Purple Wave, who typically buys these? Like our bucket truck, would it be another community that would buy ours, or is it
Other utilities buy them,
other utilities?
Mhm.
Okay.
smaller cities.
Okay.
I can't remember the city or contractors. A lot of them are contractors also,
Sure.
tree trimmers, stuff, such like that.
Okay.
The trucks with material handlers like this one has, they go for quite a bit more money because they're a lot more useful.
Sure.
The one thing about is getting a truck bought from Alltech is it takes almost a year to get it purchased, or I mean, get it here, because they have to build the truck from the ground up. So the truck probably won't be here till the beginning of next year, and that's when we'll put the other truck on Purple Wave. But I still follow through on all the testing. We have to do a yearly test on dielectric and strength testing on the trucks, and the guy also goes through and checks everything, make sure everything is working properly on the trucks, the booms. We still maintain the maintenance on them and stuff like that and then when I put them on Purple Wave, we give them the maintenance records
Right.
and testing records, and that does help them sell. A lot of the trucks that are on Purple Wave, they don't have those records, and that's why we've been having better luck selling our stuff, because we do have records like that.
Sure.
Any other questions for Chris? All right. Thank you, Chris.
No problem.
Any other discussion on the council? I'll entertain a motion.
I move we accept the bid from Alltech in the amount of $216,586 for a bucket truck.
Second.
Been moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is sale of city properties.
I will be recusing myself from this conversation for a potential conflict of interest.
So, you guys, we spoke about it, I think, in the work session a little bit. Various committee meetings, we've spoken about a couple of lots that the city owns that really aren't being used for anything, as well as the red barn over here. Had a couple of different businesses reach out to us about the red barn, so that's what kind of spurred the conversation on that. City's not really using it anymore for anything, so as we talk about economic development, the strategic plan and stuff, it kind of helped, the thinking on that item. The lots are ones at the end of Indiana. I'm not even sure why the city owns it still, or ever owned it, because it is a platted lot. I mean, Douglas County GIS has it as actual lot. There is a little bit of a flood zone that goes through one of the corners of it, but still appears to be a buildable lot. The other parcel that when I call lot is over on, it's not Mustang Drive, Summit Street in that area. It's actually an entrance that went into the land that was annexed, that you guys annexed here a few months ago. That's obviously not going to be developed. So the city owns that little piece of ground. We might as well turn it into a lot and get it back on the tax rolls. The plan was to have everything surveyed as well as appraised, and then start the bidding out at the appraisal price. So that way we knew that the city was getting fair market value on it. That was the intent on all these. So we wanted to bring this before you before we started going down those processes and start those. So thoughts, concerns, questions, anything like that?
Is the red barn, is that zoned like the rest of downtown? So could that be commercial and or residential or just residential or?
I think it's included in the same downtown zone, but that will be something that will be verified and checked before. So just like the entrance on that land, I'm not exactly sure if that's buildable or not, because there needs to be, that's why I want to survey it, there needs to be widths, make sure we can fit a house in there. The worst thing we can do is sell something and, somebody can't do anything with it, so, but that will be verified prior to.
So where's the red barn? I'm not familiar with that.
Right next door.
Right behind,
Oh.
yeah, the red brick
Big-
building.
It's the old milking, I think it used to be a milking barn for Baker.
It was.
Okay, I got you.
But it's gonna be a 30, 45 day process to go through all this, just to make sure we do all our correct items and, make sure it's done the correct way with the appraisals and all that. We can look at county appraisals all day long, but that's not right.
The only thought I had on that, does it make sense to get Main Street a little down the road? I mean, there may be some, ideal use that comes out of that process of Main Street that we may have given up that opportunity if we've already sold it by then. I'm just thinking out loud about how we're gonna use that organization to really plan that, the downtown area.
Yeah, and that was something we talked about, as well. And, where real estate is right now and the pent up demand that we have for businesses wanting to be downtown, I fear that if we just wait a year or two, we're gonna lose some opportunities that we could have had. So that's kind of what my thinking went is, hey, if it can go and bring in some more economic value for downtown, it's a win-win for somebody that's trying to start a business as well as for the city. So.
So you don't need any action?
I don't
Just
need
letting
any-
us know.
We don't need any action at this point until we receive the contracts. That's when the council will take action on those contracts. So, but I wanted to get thoughts, opinions, anything like that before we move down the road. I think we've already contacted surveying companies.
For the red barn, back here, that property.
And they're gonna do the entrance.
We can do that too, yeah.
That'll be an easy, it's an easy one. We need to know that width, because you gotta make sure that,
Yeah, I think it's a great direction to move, especially with Red Barn, potential for business to go in there, because there's definitely a pent-up demand. And if people want to open businesses in town, there's nowhere to open them, so if we're holding on to any real estate where we could potentially have a business that's generating some sales tax revenue, I'm all for it.
Where do you list all these properties that?
so they'll be posted on our website, but the intent is to do an auction. So that way it's just, we're gonna put everything out there anyways. We're gonna put the appraisal, nothing's gonna be a secret, so they're gonna have to go essentially at appraisal price and above in order to get get the properties in a setting like that, so. But it saves the city on numerous different fees and different things like that. Any other questions? Okay. Chris, you want to grab cord? Oh, there it is. All right. Council committee reports, budget.
We didn't have a meeting. It was the last council meeting.
Oh, that's the one that slept in, right? Texted us at 8:30 and said, hey, I'm counseling the finance.
Could have been, I was asleep. I don't know. I think it's a little earlier than that. Next meeting's Friday at 7:45.
Community development court.
We haven't met yet either since. Next meeting is on the 22nd at 4 o'clock.
Public safety, Susan.
We met last week and we discussed the crossing at 8th and Ames. I brought this forward to the committee because I had a citizen express concerns to me about the safety of crossing there. Her daughter almost got hit by a car. Now she's scared to walk to school. So I know KDOT was performing a traffic study, and I think that's complete for Heritage. And did they do it for that?
They did not, but my plan tonight was to move that over to finance to look at how much we're paying for that other crossing guard to see if it'd be a feasible, workable. And then I also intended on contacting the school district to see if they would be interested in participating on something for.
Is there a recommendation to put a walking guard there as opposed to a lot? Is that the?
Yeah, because we already have, well, not on Heritage, so.
No, I meant on the.
Yeah, so we already have that light there, but we still have some issues, and so the committee's thoughts were to see how much a crossing guard costs for theirs for school time, and see if we could find somebody that would be willing to do that.
I think that'll be the hardest part, finding somebody who's
Yeah.
willing to work 2 hours a day and stand in the rain or snow, but hopefully.
But that's why I wanted to have finance committee take a look at it to see where the finances are on that specific item. Pull that, extract that from the budget, and then kind of go from there.
Then we also discussed the legalizing of UTVs, which I'm sure you've all seen people driving around in Baldwin, everybody is always cruising around in UTVs. So this would just formally make them legal. Talking to Chief Patrick, he was going to get with Blake and figure out how to word this the best way. So we are inclusive of, the vehicles that we're okay with on the road without putting anything on the road that's dangerous, and at the same time not making the police officers' lives too complicated by trying to figure out which vehicle is this. So once they get that determined, then we will move forward on that. Had a question from a citizen regarding rolling blackouts, and if Baldwin was ever in a position that we had to do rolling blackouts, if we would prioritize citizens with special needs, like nursing homes, for instance. So Julie brought that to the utility committee, and they concluded that Baldwin will never have a need for a rolling blackout. So that's good news.
Yeah.
And I think that was about it.
All right, thanks, Susan.
Can we say we never have a need for?
Well, I don't think she intended that.
I would love that to be true.
I don't think Susan intended that.
I just want.
So to give a backstory, and I talked about this in the committee, we almost had a rolling blackout back in the summer of 2018. We almost had to do rolling blackouts. We did not. I don't think that you can never say never. But the likelihood is very slim, and we are advised at that meeting that they do have a system in place and are working on a system for those types of emergencies, as well as we're starting to utilize the text message stuff to notify citizens of different things, of major emergencies or stuff like that. So we're starting to work towards that, but we didn't have to in 2018. We didn't have to this last time. So. Public Works and Utilities, Julie.
Yeah, we met and several things. The work on the pool is going to start. They've got the panels in, so they're going to install those. And around mid-April, they're going to start with the acid and power washing the basin and hanging canopies and all the other things that they need to do to get the pool ready to open. They're also working on public restrooms to get them open for the season. Casey's water service has been relocated, and the transformers were installed earlier than expected.
Not mine. Not mine. Just put that out there. My water service has always been on.
Oh.
I was like, what did I miss?
Okay, so, moving on. The 2021 phase 2 of the chip and seal project is ready to go out for bids. And they've been talking to the company about the ones that have already been done. and, because there's been some complaints about it, and so they're working with the company, and the company will said they'll do whatever they need to do to fix that problem. So that's good. The other thing is I just got a letter from Jeff, and I'd like to just go ahead and read a paragraph in here that I thought was pretty interesting. This is regarding that week of below 20 degrees or whatever. During that week, the city power plant generated around the clock for 105 hours. They produced just over 354 megawatt hours of energy. They were credited $826,552 for that generation. Our total cost for fuel, water, chemicals, oil, overtime, and mutual aid was $66,695. The resulting net figures out to $759,856. And had the city not chosen to generate or was unable to, our monthly billing would have been increased by $826,552. But that would have had to been purchased in the day ahead market, which makes it a lot more expensive. So I just wanted to put that out for people that are listening to kind of give them an idea. I know it's a lot of figures, but just to show that our generation of electricity is working to keep the city running in times that are difficult. So, and that's all I have.
All right. Legislative Brian.
We meet tomorrow, 8 o'clock. We will kind of wrap up what we're talking about with strategic planning, at least this portion of it. We talked about that in utilities also. The department heads coming up with some ideas for the concepts that we want to talk about. So we will do that tomorrow.
City Administrator.
Nothing further I can think of here, Ed.
Any staff comments? Any further council comments? All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion we adjourn.
Second.
Moved in second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
Any band?
Motion passes.
Finish strong.